Can I also invite, so I guess John from CISCO in place of Bernd, David Parker, and also Shawn Sanderson to come join us on the panel. I'm going to go and sit in the audience with you lot for a moment and leave things with Jeremy.
We haven't had much of an opportunity for questions or discussions, comments from you lot today, so that's where I'm hoping that we're going to spend most of the time. But just to get the ball rolling, as they say, I've listened with interest to all of the presentations, and I've got a couple of questions for you. One of the things I wanted to pick up on is something that somebody who hasn't come back has said, but that was about the fact that even where devices and equipment is instrumented, it's instrumented in silos. Now, amen to that. That's clearly a big problem. How do you, should we just work along the line? How do you see that being solved? Is it a matter of standards? Is it a matter of semantics? How are we going to get beyond the siloing of instrumented devices? Should we just go this way?
Sure. So I'm assuming you're speaking about how solutions are sold today in the M2M space, right? You have a solution, you've got devices that go out, they solve that challenge. How do we bridge the gap between various applications? Is that?
For example.
Right. So I think, and if you look at even the last presentation around what Callie's trying to do around the cloud, there is that focus on trying to take advantage of what's already been deployed. And there's a number of technologies, various cloud solutions, the use of APIs to be able to start bridging the gap between existing devices, existing data streams, and start collecting that across a number of applications and devices, and to be able to leverage existing infrastructure. And I use the example of telematics, where a deployment has been only used maybe for one part of telematics for managing that asset. Moving forward, instead of deploying a second piece of technology to do the cold chain management, to be able to integrate those sensors, those APIs, and to share that information using the same technology that's already been invested. So I think that's really a mix of development, the cloud applications, and big data systems.
From my perspective, I think it's kind of twofold. I think the standards play an important part. And the Industrial Internet Consortium is a body that SAP has joined along with some of my colleagues sitting up here on this panel, where we outline what the standards should be for data collection, data harmonization. We actually create test harnesses and test packs across our combined solution set to make sure we have a defined standard that we can talk to customers about. But at the said time, you also have to look at doing some processing on the edge as well. So there has to be a certain amount of capability from a software standpoint that can process on the edge and allow for synchronization of that data to a cloud-based solution. So that's where you actually get the harmonization of the data, you actually get the coherence of the silos actually seeming as if they were one solution set across a large enterprise. It's a non-trivial exercise to run through, but it's one that, when you're looking at the Internet of Things, it's one that you have to address head on. But the good news is that there are plenty of solutions out there that can actually help solve that type of solution.
Yeah, I would also add that I think it's going to be a combination of APIs, as you heard before, but also gateways. So gatewaying in, putting in technology that integrates with what we would call legacy technologies, these silo type technologies with their protocols that are bespoke maybe, and allowing transition for manufacturers and organizations and companies to migrate from what they have onto new platforms. So using the internet protocol as a common transport mechanism, that's not prevalent in many environments still today, maybe in manufacturing, electrical utility environments. Making sure the services that are required and delivered by those protocols as well is also supported in those environments. And providing a migration path to where they want to get the business to. So for me, it's about gatewaying, application integration, and common transport mechanisms.
Yeah, I generally agree with all of that. I think I'm coming at it from a slightly different angle, where I'd like to stress the importance of data schemas and metadata. I think this is all kind of applicable. If you look at most organizations, we're trying to consolidate data streams coming in from different parts of the business. Nothing can ruin it faster than having poor metadata, or in fact having to change data types so often. And I think we face the same problems with IoT in different device types. I think for a certain period, from a data perspective, the idea of a schema became less fashionable with the introduction of kind of key value stores and document stores. People can start developing and chuck data in and not worry about it. So from this point, I like to stress the importance of a data model, which is very important, along with its schemas and metadata, which persists and is not kind of vulnerable to personal interpretation, which then changes over time. So I think that it will actually streamline the whole data interconnectivity extremely well. So I think it's a slightly different angle, but I think that's the bit that I'm particularly interested in.
All right, I'll try something else that maybe might provoke a little bit more disagreement then. We hear a lot about the opportunities in Internet of Things. Now, as you were talking this morning, I think it was you again, David, talking about some of the big gains that are to be made. But with Web 1.0, Web 2.0, there were losers as well as gainers, weren't there? There were, I mean, you know, if you ran an independent bookshop, you haven't really enjoyed the last decade that much. So, who do you think are going to be the losers from the Internet of Things? At whose cost is all this going to happen? Or aren't there any losers? Is just everybody a winner?
Well, in any game, there's always losers and winners, right? So I think this is a game of fortitude, if you will. There is a movement in the industry that's moving towards digitalization. Ultimately, the smaller vendors, the high street stores, if you want to call them that, or the mom and pop stores, as we call them in the US, those are the ones that ultimately suffer in any type of new evolution of IT or market. If they can't afford to adopt the new technology or can't afford to move quickly enough, then unfortunately they will lose out. But the good news for them, depending on what type of service they are striving to achieve, then there are software as a service applications that they can leverage in the cloud, which ultimately reduces their own footprint. I don't think any of us in the room wants to be the next Kodak or the next Blockbuster, but we all strive to be the next Google, Yahoo, and Netflix, right? Because that's the way the industry is moving to. So unfortunately, yes, there will be losers at the lower end of the enterprise, but I think there's an opportunity there for them to leverage what the so-called bigger guys are doing at the said time and actually build their next generation of businesses on those defined platforms that are readily available.
Anyone else going to pick some losers?
I think it'd be wrong to pick names of losers.
Kinds of entities.
I'd be down the bookies if I could do that. But I think it is fairly clear that it's important to be adaptable. And I mentioned a few disruptors that we saw in the 2000s, that we're seeing currently in the environments we're in today. But those companies themselves will be disrupted as well if they don't evolve and look at who the next challengers are. So I think it's about trying to be your own next competition, if you like. And I think for the small retailers, I think there's real opportunity out there for organizations to come in and offer services to multiple small retailers in those environments to help them adapt. So they don't have the resources and probably the ability to make all the adaptation that they require, but there will be companies out there who can offer that out as a service to them. So there'll be plenty of opportunities, I think, out there for organizations like that.
Yeah, I think there's two different players when you look at the winners and losers. And I think if we talk about the example of enterprises, from large enterprises down to small business, I don't think anything changes with IoT or Internet of Things or any of this. I think it's an example of, or the ability for them to be able to innovate and be different hasn't changed from 30 years ago to today. They just have different tools to work with. And as an example, in the small business segment, yes, they do have access to cloud-based applications. The cost of technology and doing things in the Internet of Things has gone down considerably. So there's no reason for why they can't enter and compete in the same way they did 30 years ago. They've just, the playing field has changed, but I don't think it's become unleveled. I think where the winners and losers really start to fall out is the companies that are providing and enabling these technologies from small business up to enterprise. And I see the ones that are collaborative, that are engaging and finding ways to work amongst the, I call the ecosystem of the Internet of Things, being the winners. And I see the ones that have built platforms and locked in and decided that they're going to go at a singular vision of their own ecosystem. And again, without being specific, there are a number of those companies that are very large today, and they've gone down the path that they're building their own ecosystem. And as long as you want to come into that ecosystem, you're okay, but they're not interested in participating outwards. And I don't think from both a business or consumer segment that people want to be dictated on what choices they can make. And so I think that's going to be the deciding factor between winners and losers.
I don't think you like this, Jeremy, but I agree with Shawn on that point. It's the point I wanted to make about people that try and lock people into these solutions are going to lose, I think, ultimately. I think you have to embrace standards and not always go down the proprietary route and be stubborn against it. I think the other point I wanted to say was this idea, I think, that smaller businesses might suffer is incorrect. I think companies like ThroughTek and other small companies, we're trying to address that. You know, smaller companies don't have the personnel, the manpower to develop teams to work at this type of integration themselves in-house. I think that's kind of quite comfortably where we sit, working with SMBs to enable this and to lower the barrier to entry to keep them up to speed. But I think ultimately people will always be quite novel, and they will adapt, and they will come up with interesting ways of playing the system against it. Even if, from a very cynical viewpoint, it's actually taking advantage of any security concerns that currently exist in IoT solutions. So I think that there's always room for adaptability and novel ways of cashing in on it.
Over to you. Any questions from the floor? Please. Actually, even if you had one, I'm not sure I could. There you go. Do we have a roving mic of any sort? Or yes, we do. It's behind you.
You just mentioned the security in Internet of Things, and I'm in the medical industry, and so devices, or let's say sensors that are going to be in part of the Internet of Things, they need to be connected, but they also need to be secure in the sense that they are secure from the outside in or inside out. Let's say the security of the data itself, or the security of devices for functionality. How do you exactly see that as being a business area or ready-made, let's say plug-and-play solutions that would be a standard gateway for connecting? And you didn't really speak much about security and how to really connect in a safe way, and especially in the medical industry. That is very important for us, because we have to look at the device side being safe to use, or the safety of the data. There's a lot of questions there, but
okay, no, thank you. Well, I'll try to address just the general security mode there, and it's kind of why I mentioned there's a choice between direct device connectivity and also the gateway model. One of the big bonuses in terms of working with a hub or gateway is to actually reduce the attack surface, as people like to say, from individual devices. So they only operate in their internal local network. And this is very much what All-Join solution tries to look at, with some degree of security baked into it. Those load-drain devices are not connected direct to the internet. You are not making a direct connection to it. So therefore, you only have to secure the gateway side, and that is a lot simpler to do. So that's a general approach, and that's one that we support as well.
I would look at it on two fronts. So one is the integrity of the data that's being transmitted. So making sure that what has left a device or a person is actually what arrives at the destination, first of all, so in its unadulterated format. But also that the device itself can't be spoofed and can't be attacked in a surface attack. So that's one angle to it. But there's also about data security itself in terms of personal data security. And I think that's a big topic that hasn't been fully addressed yet. In terms of all of our data when we sign up to an app on our mobile phone, who owns that data, where does it go, who has the rights to that data. It can offer tremendous benefits to us, but it's the security of that and the ownership of that as well. I think there are a couple of aspects to that.
And I think from my perspective, at least, the way we come at it is, again, twofold. It's on the device layer itself, and working with a number of partners, CISCO being one, that we look at not only the gateway, the actual physical device, on what kind of security protocols you can drive down to the device itself. Again, with our long history that we've had on innovating with firms like Intel at the chip level, we do a lot of securitization of not only the data but the hardware itself at the chip level. And then to the second point, data security is huge. It's kind of one of the biggest topics that we have to address, which is why we joined the Industrial Internet Consortium a few months ago to help define what those standards should be for data security. And the biggest challenge you have is that when you look at an ecosystem of various vendors like you see on this panel, each of us will pull data from different data streams, different data assets across an enterprise, and we'll look to harmonize that data and almost have data as a service sitting on infrastructure as a service and software as a service. So if we're all pulling different data streams and at the end of that we aggregate that data and derive some sense from that data with a value, well, which one of the four of us is going to monetize that data? Who's going to have ownership of that data, particularly if it contains personal information? So there's many different government legislations that are out there on what you can and cannot do with data. Obviously, the Asian market, like in Taiwan, is going to be very different to how it allows a company to use personal data as opposed to the US government or the UK government. So these are the challenges that we face. So it goes way, way beyond just the security of the device itself and how we can figure that out technically. Technically, we can solve that. But ultimately, it depends on the personal interaction with that data and how we securitize that to make sure that data has value.
I think network operators in every market have a unique position because for years, privacy and security of customer data has been key to the business and how they deal with care and share that information in order to manage the customer experience. So I think naturally, partnership in the various domestic markets with network operators along with the technology providers is a great opportunity to, again, solve some of these challenges because there's a historical requirement for privacy of data and securing consumer information, and how that applies to the enterprise is similar in many ways. But as you look at IoT with more connected devices, obviously that increases drastically the number of potential risks. But it also, there's the security side, which I think from a device perspective and a technology can be solved. The other side of security and is more privacy related and what data is being shared and who uses it. Looking at things like privacy by design, which is building a privacy policy, which is far ahead of what's available in the market, that goes ahead of what the governments are putting in place to help consumers understand what they're signing up for in order to protect them against the sharing of their data. And it's more than opting out or opting in. That becomes really, I think, one of the key next steps for using security and data when it comes to consumers and enterprises.
There was an extra point I wanted to mention, which I kind of touched on it in my talk about pairing with security experts to get accreditation. That's not just for the image, it's clear because you acknowledge that it's a difficult area. I think the other point I wanted to build on was this idea, which is still a problem, rather, it's still a challenge, is the idea of data aggregation. So when you're building up data sets and data sources from people, the effective impact level of that data increases as well, and I think this is a really tricky one. I mean, this comes from government protocols and government regulation on this. So as we collect more and more data streams from individuals, we have to deal with these problems of escalating impact levels for that data set or that data store. So it's a challenge.
I want to top up on the government side. So I think we have to understand, though, that, and I recently had a discussion with a number of government ministers from different countries, And the fact is that as technology companies, as telecom providers, as IoT, M2M leaders in our various fields, we're actually out ahead of the curve to government policies and rules. So in some ways, it's our obligation to create what the capabilities are, because government policies can't keep up fast enough with requirements of security and privacy. So to a degree, they are expecting the leadership in the industry to drive some of those standards and to lead, not to follow what government regulations are.
Okay. Anybody else got a question? Do you want to wait for the mic? It's on its way.
Thank you very much. As machines become more and more prevalent around the world, talk to each other more and more pervasive in our lives, how do we make sure it's us that's controlling them and not vice versa? So how do we avoid the hell scenario, as it were?
Did you hear that?
Did you hear the question?
No, I didn't.
Well, I think I heard it, though I have to say I'm finding the acoustics a little bit difficult. Are other people having that problem? Anyway, I think the question was, as the M2M and Internet of Things becomes more sophisticated, how do we make sure that it's us controlling the machines and not vice versa? Was that a fair summary?
I think, I mean, that's a really interesting topic, and I'm sure you'd get a long panel discussion on it. I think it depends what you mean by controlling us, of course, because if you look at, Shawn went through quite a few examples of typical logic scenarios of how it's going to improve our lives. Now, would you consider that to be controlling us through having automation and saving us time? I mean, so it becomes a little bit about semantics and definition. Okay. But yeah, generally I think that it's a scale. There's a gradual scale that exists here, and I'm not sure if you're talking about Terminator-style apocalypse situations or not.
Can I just ask, do a quick poll, because I chatted to some people during the coffee break. The world that Shawn set out for us with the shower turning on when the alarm clock went off and so on, how many people find that attractive? Okay, just thought I'd run that way. That was the... I'm sure. Maybe it's just the heating that they want to come on before they get out from the duvet.
But I think from a business perspective, that's very much where the world is leading to, somewhat to full autonomy, if you will. So manufacturing, as an example, a prime industry where they want full automation. Again, getting back to machine, having the machines work for themselves and being fault tolerant, talking to one another, if you will, and expressing a desire to when they need to be repaired or not, or if a faulty part exists in them. In that environment, you'd want full automation. In the environment where you've actually got a human interacting, in such as a workman that needs to go and tighten a bolt with his wrench, as was described earlier, then you're going to want to have some human control over that. Would you want a full robot to be coming in and brushing your teeth in the morning? Personally, no. They may want to do other things, but brushing the teeth, not. So again, it's a degree of where you want to draw the line, a degree of how you want the environment to be controlled in terms of goods, products and services that are being provided, and how that impacts your personal life. And I think at that point it will be a personal choice that ultimately the consumer will make. But from a manufacturing standpoint, a retail, consumer products, automotive, they want to go as full automation as possible, where it makes sense to, because ultimately that drives operational efficiency and reduces cost. And again, it will be down to us to determine which elements of that we sign up to.
I think the reality is we're feeling our way here. You know, if people had the answer, then the world would be good. But an example would be, you know, the driverless car proof of concepts that are happening in Milton Keynes and a couple of other cities, I think, in the UK. The next, when eventually the building works finish at London Bridge, the trains going off over London Bridge will be under computer-based control, as are, you know, if you think of the trains at Heathrow or other airports that you may go on, the monorails, they're under computer-based control. However, the trains going over London Bridge initially will have a driver there and they will be able to take over the control. Why do we want to do that? Because that means you can increase throughput in terms of passenger carrying capacity by up to 30% by doing that. So it's having the efficiencies of those computational elements that can be the advantages that can be taken off by using technology. But my own view is there will be like a human override on some of the key things, and we're just trying to figure out where those points are right now, is what I see.
Shawn, this is the. If we finish now, then we're back on track again. So I'm going to let you have the last word.
Wow. A lot of pressure. I'll keep it brief then. I think it's all choice related. I think in the consumer space, the machines aren't going to take control of our lives. It's really what you feel comfortable with. For some people, the scenario I described is their ideal scenario of simplifying their lives. For others, it's taking out a lot of the things that, their human touch in their day-to-day lives that they in their rituals and the way they do things. And it's just a scenario. This could be a hospital environment. It could be a number of different scenarios around that. But when we look at the enterprise or business segments, the automation, the reduction in errors that are generated by us, the humans that are involved in a lot of these processes, nobody likes to talk about, and we don't like the concept of losing control. The fact is there is no reason to put someone at the controls of a train, but we do it because everyone feels safer to see someone standing at the controls. The reality is the machine probably operates with less risk and a higher level of safety on an autonomous basis. And so that element of it is partially to do with just the way that we think and our social behaviors and our feelings towards having things automated around us. And I think from a consumer perspective, it's always going to be in our control as to what we want and what we don't want. I think how businesses move forward, it will be driven by dollars and benefits to the organization and shareholders, which will likely mean higher levels of automation and machine control.
Thank you very much, all of you. If we finish now, which is a shame because I've got loads of questions I want to ask you, but if we finish now, then we're back on track with the schedule. So I'm going to hand back to Matt, and there we are. Thank you very much, all of you.